3:03 a.m. The glass hit the floor before I did. A sharp crack, water spreading like blood, my knee twisting, breath ripped from my chest. "Evan," I gasped. "Help me." Silence, then from down the hall, laughter. A voice I knew too well, cold and careless. "Don't help, she's used to falling." I froze. The pain burned, but the words burned deeper. I wasn't someone's mother anymore. I was background noise in my own home, so I stayed there, on that cold kitchen floor, watching the dawn creep through the window. And as the light reached me, one thought cut through the ache. Maybe I didn't just fall tonight, maybe I finally woke up. It was 3:03 a.m. when the glass slipped from my fingers. 1 second I was steady. The next my knee gave out and the world tilted sharply to the left. The sound was deafening, the crash of my glass hitting the hardwood floor. The sharp clink of water scattering into darkness. For a moment I thought it was thunder. Then the pain arrived, a slow, punishing wave rolling up from my hip to my chest. I tried to move. Nothing. The air was cold, the kind that makes your breath sound too loud in your ears. My nightgown was twisted, my left leg numb. Somewhere above me the refrigerator hummed, the only proof that the world hadn't stopped. I pressed my palms against the floor, trying to lift myself. But my arms trembled like thin branches in wind. "Evan," I called, voice cracking. "Evan, help me." No response. I called again, louder this time. "Evan, Tanya." Still nothing. Then from the hallway the faint creak of a door. My heart fluttered with relief. I thought finally. But before I could speak again I heard it, laughter. A man's low chuckle followed by a woman's voice, careless, drowsy. "Don't help," she said. "She's used to falling." Silence followed. Then the door clicked shut. For a full minute I lay frozen, unsure if I'd imagined it. But the words kept replaying, cutting deeper each time. "She's used to falling." I turned my head toward the faint glow under their door. My son, my only child, was laughing at me. The same boy I'd carried through pneumonia at 3, through his father's funeral at 10, through college tuition I could barely afford. The ache in my hip pulsed with a different kind of pain now, not just physical, but emotional, something that hollowed me from the inside out. I tried again to move, to drag myself toward the couch or wall, anything I could use to lift up, but my body betrayed me. I was old, fragile, and now invisible. Time blurred. I don't know how long I stayed there, maybe an hour, maybe 3. The house settled around me, indifferent. Shadows shifted with the streetlights. The heater clicked on and off. I could hear the soft rhythm of their laughter again, or maybe it was just in my head by then. I thought about how it had come to this, how the same house that once echoed with bedtime stories and birthday candles now felt like a prison cell. I remembered the night his father died, the car accident, the rain, the way Evan clung to me and sobbed, "Don't ever leave me, Mom." And I didn't, not once. I worked 2 jobs. I skipped meals so he could eat. I sold my wedding ring to help pay for his first car. And yet, here I was, sprawled on the floor. My son behind a closed door, pretending not to hear me. Around 5 a.m., the first thin light of dawn began creeping through the blinds. My throat was dry. My hip throbbed so violently that every breath felt like a small betrayal of my body. Somewhere upstairs I heard a toilet flush. The faint sound of running water, a door opening, closing again. I wanted to call out, but my voice felt too small, too tired, too defeated. So I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, at the tiny crack above the light fixture that looked almost like a river. It had been there for years, spreading inch by inch, the way distance grows between people who stop listening. I wondered if that's what had happened to us, a slow, quiet cracking until one day the ceiling simply split apart. The clock ticked on. When morning finally arrived, I could hear Tanya humming in the kitchen, making coffee. The smell filled the air, hazelnut, rich and sweet. My body screamed for help, but my pride held my tongue. By the time Evan came downstairs, I had managed to crawl halfway to the couch. He looked at me just for a second, then at his phone. "Rough night?" he asked casually, as if I were a stranger describing a bad dream. I forced a smile. "Just slipped." He nodded, poured himself coffee and went to work. When the door closed behind him, I sat there, shaking. That's when it hit me, not the pain. Not even the humiliation, but the understanding that something precious had quietly died between us long ago. And maybe it had been my fault, too. Maybe I'd raised him to be too independent, too self-assured, too certain that his mother would always be there no matter how cruel he became. The sun spilled across the living room, turning everything gold, the photo frames, the dust, the half-empty glass still on the floor. And in that stillness I whispered, so softly that even I could barely hear it. Maybe I raised him too well to forget me. The smell of burnt toast woke me before the sunlight did. My hips screamed the moment I tried to sit up, reminding me that last night wasn't a dream. The bruise had spread like spilled ink across my side, deep purple, angry and real. The kitchen was already alive with noise, cabinets slamming, the coffee machine sputtering, Tanya's heels tapping impatiently against the tile. I listened to their voices drifting through the hallway, calm and casual, as if nothing had happened at 3 a.m., as if my fall had never existed. When I finally managed to shuffle into the kitchen, Evan looked up from his phone just long enough to say, "Morning, Mom," before going back to his emails. His tone was polite, almost distant, the kind you use with a neighbor, not the woman who raised you. Tanya didn't even glance at me. She was too busy adjusting her lipstick in the reflection of the microwave. She poured coffee into 2 mugs, added sugar to his, none to hers, and handed it to him with a practiced smile. "Big day today," she said. "The real estate deal closes at noon." Evan nodded, eyes still on his phone. "Yeah, I need to swing by the office early." Neither of them asked how I slept. Neither asked about the shattered glass still sitting in a small pile on the counter. I sat down slowly, pressing one hand to my hip. The chair felt harder than usual, the silence heavier. I watched them move around the kitchen, perfect choreography, the rhythm of people who have forgotten anyone else exists. Then a soft voice broke through the quiet. "Grandma." Sophie stood by the doorway, still in her pajamas, her long hair tangled from sleep. Her eyes flicked from me to the bruise on my arm. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Something inside me softened. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a little sore." She frowned, unconvinced. "I heard a noise last night. I wanted to check, but Dad told me to go back to bed." That sentence hung in the air like a verdict. Evan cleared his throat, setting down his cup. "Sophie, finish your breakfast." "Grandma's fine." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment longer before she obeyed, the only light left in that house, 12 years old and already learning silence. I looked at my son. His jaw was tight, his shirt perfectly pressed, his hair combed with precision. He looked so much like his father that it hurt, except his father had warmth in his eyes. Evan's were cold now, gray and distant. "You didn't hear me last night?" I asked softly. He didn't look up. "I was half asleep, Mom. Thought maybe you just dropped something. You should really be more careful." The words landed like tiny blades, not cruel, not overtly, just careless enough to cut. Tanya finally spoke. "Maybe we should get her one of those life alert things, in case she falls again." The way she said it, "falls again," made it sound like I was an accident waiting to happen, not a person who'd once run a whole household, taught her son to read, and worked late nights cataloging books at the local library. I wanted to tell her that I didn't need a button around my neck, I needed respect. But instead I nodded. That might be a good idea, because arguing would mean caring, and I was done showing wounds to people who only measured them by inconvenience. After they left for work, the house fell quiet again. I moved through it slowly, cleaning up the broken glass from the night before. The sunlight through the blinds hit the floor in long golden stripes, catching the glimmer of the shards. I swept each piece carefully, as if it were part of a ritual, as if I could somehow sweep away last night's humiliation along with it. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the years that led to this silence. When did Evan start pulling away? Was it when I sold my car to help him with his down payment? When I moved in to help with Sophie and quietly became the live-in maid? Or was it even earlier when grief hardened both of us in different ways and I mistook his distance for strength? There was no single moment. It was like a slow erosion, little bits of love chipped away until all that remained was politeness. By noon, I was exhausted. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the kitchen window, and stared at the yard I used to tend every morning. The roses had wilted, the soil cracked. Tanya kept saying she'd hire a gardener. She never did. A memory flashed, Evan at 5 years old, running through that same yard barefoot, clutching a frog in his hands, laughing so loudly that even the neighbors smiled. "Look, Mom, he's slimy," he'd shouted, proud and innocent. Now he barely said good morning. The ache in my chest was worse than the one in my hip. That evening, when the house finally quieted again, I went to my room and opened the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside, under folded quilts and forgotten photo albums, I found a small blue notebook with frayed edges and a ribbon bookmark, my diary. I hadn't touched it in 12 years, not since the day Leela died. My daughter, my firstborn, the one who should have lived long enough to teach her brother how to love properly. The pages smelled faintly of dust and lavender. My handwriting stared back at me, looping and strong. "Today, I am grateful for my children." I traced the words with my finger. The ink had faded, but the sentiment hadn't. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. Sitting at my small writing desk, I opened to a blank page and picked up my pen. My hands shook a little, but the words came easily, quiet, deliberate, certain. Day 1 of remembering who I am. The line looked small on the page, but it felt monumental. I hadn't written for me in so long. Everything I'd done for years had been for someone else: cooking, cleaning, paying, forgiving. Now, for the first time, I was reclaiming something simple, my own voice. I closed the notebook and set it beside my bed. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane. I could hear Evan and Tanya talking in their room, laughter muffled behind the walls. I didn't listen this time. Instead, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. Tomorrow, I will start moving towards something that feels like peace. As I turned off the light, the darkness didn't feel quite so heavy. Because for the first time in years, I knew exactly who I was, and I knew that remembering her was the beginning of everything I'd lost. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and lemon. A small TV in the corner played a morning talk show no one was really watching. I sat in one of those vinyl chairs that stick to your skin, absently tracing the frayed edge of a magazine. My name, Gloria Hale, was printed neatly on a clipboard resting in my lap next to the word patient. I hated that word. A woman across from me, gray curls, polite smile, was talking to the receptionist. Her voice carried across the room, not angry, just tired. "My son says the house is too much for me now," she said. "He and his wife are moving me into a nursing home in Tacoma. They said it's for my safety." Her words sank into me like stones. For my safety. That phrase was so familiar, the way people soften cruelty with good intentions. She went on, her voice trembling. "They already sold my car, said I don't need it anymore." The receptionist nodded sympathetically but didn't look up. When my name was called, I rose slowly, my hips still stiff. The therapist, a cheerful young woman named Cara, helped me through the exercises, counting softly under her breath. She kept saying, "You're doing great, Gloria," as if encouragement could patch over the quiet ache in my chest. Afterward, I sat in the parking lot for a long time, gripping the steering wheel of my old blue sedan. Across the street, the same woman from the waiting room stood with her son, waving goodbye as he loaded boxes into a truck marked Silver Pines Assisted Living. I watched her force a smile before climbing in, her small body swallowed by the shadow of the vehicle. Something about it made my stomach twist, maybe because I saw my own reflection in her fate. When I drove home, the house felt colder than usual. Tanya's voice drifted from the kitchen before I even hung up my coat. She left her mess in the sink again, she muttered into her phone. "Honestly, I can't keep doing this. It's like having another child, except this one doesn't pay rent." I froze, listening. The words were sharp, casual, rehearsed. She just lingers, Tanya continued. She eats what she wants, takes up space, and now Evan's talking about her medical bills. She's draining the family. The phrase hit harder than any fall could. Draining the family. I backed away quietly before she could see me. In the hallway mirror, my reflection stared back, pale, lined, weary. I didn't look like someone who was draining anyone. I looked like someone who'd already given everything. Lunch was sitting on the counter when I entered the kitchen an hour later. Leftovers again, cold spaghetti, a slice of bread hard as cardboard. I noticed my favorite mug missing. The one with daisies that Evan had given me on Mother's Day when he was 12. When I asked Tanya about it, she shrugged. Oh, it chipped. I threw it out. No apology, no care. That evening I reached for my purse to pay a bill and realized my pension card was gone. Panic set in as I emptied drawers, checked pockets, tore through my bedroom. Nothing. When I asked Evan, he barely looked up from his laptop. I just used it to pay the power bill, Mom. You said I could last month. I said you could borrow it for groceries, I corrected gently. He sighed as though I were being difficult. It's all the same thing. We're one household. No, I thought we used to be, but I didn't argue. What good would it do? They'd already stopped hearing me long ago. Later that night, Sophie slipped quietly into my room. Her hair was braided loosely, her oversized sweatshirt nearly swallowing her. She shut the door behind her and held up her phone. Grandma, she whispered, I think you should hear this. I hesitated. What is it, sweetheart? She pressed play. Tanya's voice filled the room. Clear and sharp. She's like a ghost, honestly, just floats around doing nothing. Sometimes I think she pretends to hurt herself so we'll feel guilty. Poor Evan, he's too kind. I'd send her to a home tomorrow if I could. Then laughter, Tanya's and another woman's, one of her friends from her tennis club, probably. My stomach turned, but my face didn't move. I sat perfectly still. Listening to the woman who ate at my table and slept under my roof mock me like a burden. Sophie's eyes brimmed with tears. I'm sorry, Grandma, I didn't mean to make you sad. I didn't want you to think you're crazy. I reached out and took her hand. You did the right thing, I whispered, and you're very brave. When she left, I sat by the mirror for a long time. My reflection looked back at me, older than I remembered, but not broken. My eyes, though tired, still held a trace of fire. I thought of the woman from the therapy clinic, of the truck labeled Silver Pine, of Tanya's laughter, Evan's indifference, Sophie's trembling voice. That's when I said it aloud to the woman in the mirror. They've mistaken silence for weakness. My voice didn't shake this time. For years I had survived by staying quiet, believing patience was the same as strength, but patience had only made me invisible. That night, I sat on my bed with my diary open again. The page from yesterday stared back at me, day one of remembering who I am. I turned to a new page and wrote slowly, carefully, each letter deliberate. Day two, they think I've forgotten who I was. They're wrong. Then I closed the book and set it on the nightstand. The house was still except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Tanya laughed softly in the distance, another phone call, another performance. I let the sound wash over me, not as pain this time, but as fuel. I wasn't sure what I was planning yet, but I knew it would be quiet, steady, and unstoppable. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt certain. Tomorrow, I told myself, the world would still see an old woman. But by then, I'd already started becoming something else entirely. A woman who refused to disappear. It was late morning when I heard the doorbell ring. I was still in my robe, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, staring at the small note Sophie had left me before school. I love you, Grandma, don't listen to them. The handwriting was shaky but full of heart. It made me smile for a moment before I caught my reflection in the window, an old woman, shoulders slightly hunched, face marked with last night's fatigue. The bell rang again, followed by a warm, familiar voice. Gloria, it's Anya. You didn't forget me, did you? Dr. Anya Nguyen, my family doctor for almost 15 years, and before that a friend of my late husband. She'd been at our wedding years ago when her hair was still black instead of silver. I opened the door, surprised. "Dr. Nguyen, I wasn't expecting you." She smiled, stepping inside with the kind of quiet energy that fills a room without trying. "You've missed your checkup again. Thought I'd stop by before my clinic hours. You don't mind?" "Of course not," I said, even though the house was a mess. There were coffee rings on the table, newspapers stacked on the counter, and a broken picture frame I hadn't fixed yet. Anya glanced around gently, her eyes scanning without judgment. "How have you been feeling? I heard you had another fall." I nodded, sitting slowly. "Just clumsy, I guess. Clumsy doesn't leave bruises that deep," she said softly. Crouching beside me, her hands were cool against my skin as she examined my leg. The bruise on my thigh had darkened to a sickly violet. "This looks painful. How long has it been?" "A few days," I said. "It's fine, I've had worse." She looked up, studying me. "And emotionally, you seem different." I hesitated. "Tired mostly. The house feels heavier than it used to." She sighed, opening her leather bag. "Gloria, I've known you a long time. I remember the woman who used to organize charity drives, bake for every school fundraiser, and still manage to read 2 books a week. You've always been strong, but strong people need help too." I tried to smile. "You sound like my daughter used to." Anya placed a small card on the table. It was white with bold black letters. "National Elder Support Hotline Confidential 24/7. "I don't need that," I said quickly. "Just keep it." She replied, her tone calm. "Sometimes people forget that neglect can hurt just as much as bruises. You're not alone." "I'm not abused," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Then quieter, "I'm just forgotten." She met my eyes and nodded slowly. "That's a kind of hurt too." Her words hung in the air long after she left. When the house fell quiet again, I sat at the table, tracing the edges of that card with my fingertip. I could feel my pulse under the paper. Forgotten. The word fit too easily. I thought of Tanya's laughter, Evan's sighs, the cold leftovers that passed for dinner. Forgotten wasn't just a word, it was a condition. I tried to distract myself by cleaning. It had become my routine, the only thing that still made me feel useful. I started in the living room, dusting picture frames, rearranging books, wiping fingerprints off the glass cabinet. When I got to Evan's desk, I noticed a stack of unopened mail and a small folder labeled Joint Family Expenses. The title made me pause. I shouldn't have looked. But curiosity is its own kind of survival instinct, especially when you already suspect something's wrong. Inside were bank statements, my bank statements, the same ones I thought came directly to my email. At first, I couldn't process the numbers, then it sank in. There were withdrawals, steady, predictable, every month, sometimes twice. E-Hail authorized user, my son's name. The amounts weren't small either. Mortgage payments, car repairs, shopping expenses. Thousands gone in less than a year. My hand trembled as I flipped through the pages. I told myself the missing money was oversight, maybe automatic payments, but this was deliberate, signed and approved. A note in Evan's handwriting read, "Mom won't notice, handle bills as usual." For a long moment I just stood there, heart pounding so hard it made my ribs ache. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. It wasn't just neglect anymore. It was theft wrapped in family loyalty. I sat down slowly on the couch, clutching the folder to my chest. I wanted to scream, to confront him, to demand why he'd do this, but the anger passed as quickly as it came. What would shouting accomplish? He'd call it a misunderstanding. Tanya would roll her eyes. Sophie would cry. No, this time I needed something quieter, something smarter. I looked at the hotline card again. The edges were already curling under my thumb. I read the words, "If you feel unsafe, call us." Unsafe, that wasn't the right word. I wasn't unsafe, I was unseen. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need saving, I needed strategy. I reached for the phone, not the hotline, a different number one I hadn't dialed in years. It rang twice before a woman answered. Her voice was crisp, confident. Joan Mercer speaking. Joan, I said quietly, it's Gloria Hale. I think I need your help. There was a pause, then a tone I hadn't heard in years, equal parts affection and alarm. Gloria, my God, it's been forever. What kind of help are we talking about? The kind that involves signatures. And maybe a little justice. Joan laughed softly, but her voice lowered. I'm listening. I looked toward the staircase where I could hear faint footsteps upstairs. My son's voice, Tanya's laughter, the life that had slowly erased mine. I'll explain everything, I said, keeping my voice calm. But not over the phone. Can we meet tomorrow, somewhere quiet? Of course, Joan replied. Same cafe as always. Yes, I whispered. Same as always. After I hung up, I slid the hotline card into my diary, not to use but to remind myself of the moment I chose a different path. Outside, the sky had turned gray. Rain began tapping against the window, soft and steady. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel powerless. I felt focused. Because forgetting me was one thing, but underestimating me, that was their mistake. The next morning, Seattle was soaked in rain, the kind of cold, steady drizzle that blurred everything into shades of gray. I dressed carefully, navy sweater, gray slacks, my late husband's scarf. It still carried the faint scent of cedar and aftershave. I tied it around my neck like armor. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. The bell above the door jingled softly, and the smell of roasted coffee wrapped around me like a blanket. I chose a booth by the window. The same one my husband and I used to sit in every Sunday before he passed. When Joan Mercer walked in, I barely recognized her at first. Her hair, once chestnut, was now silver and cropped short, but her eyes, sharp, alert, intelligent, hadn't changed. She spotted me immediately and smiled, the kind that reaches the eyes only halfway. Gloria Hale, she said, sliding into the booth. You look exactly the same. I laughed quietly. You're a terrible liar. Maybe, she said, removing her gloves, but I've missed lying to you. We ordered tea. When the waitress left, Joan leaned forward, her expression softening. So, tell me what happened. For the next 20 minutes, I told her everything, the fall, the laughter from behind Evan's door, Tanya's cruelty, the missing money, the silence. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I just told it like a story, one I'd finally accepted as my own. When I finished, Joan was quiet for a long time. She stirred her tea absent-mindedly, then set the spoon down. You don't have to die to disappear, she said finally. Sometimes silence is enough. Her words sank deep. Disappear, I repeated. She nodded. You've already been erased in your own home, Gloria. Now it's time to do it on your terms. Leave before they take what's left of you. I leaned back, the rain streaking the window behind her. And go where? I don't even know who I am outside that house anymore. Joan smiled faintly. Then let's find her again. The woman who used to organize community fundraisers, who raised 2 children by herself, who built a life out of love and hard work. She's still in there, buried under years of guilt. I took a deep breath. What do you suggest? First, she said, pulling out her tablet, we protect your finances. You'll transfer your savings into a new account under your maiden name, Gloria Linton. Quietly, no alerts, no paper mail. Then we rewrite your will, make it clean, direct. If anything happens to you, everything goes where you decide, not them. I hesitated. Won't they notice? Joan's smile turned sly. Only if you tell them, and something tells me you've learned how to keep secrets. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, control. We spent the next hour sketching out the details. A quiet withdrawal plan, a new P.O. box for statements, a lawyer contact for the revised will. Every move would look ordinary: groceries, charity donations, simple errands. When she finished, Joan reached across the table and took my hand. You don't have to confront them, Gloria. Just step out of their narrative, start writing your own. Her words lingered long after I drove home. The house looked the same as always when I walked in, clean, expensive, cold. Tanya's perfume hung in the air, mixed with the faint scent of bleach. I set my umbrella down and quietly hung my coat. I was heading upstairs when I heard her voice from the living room. "Gloria," Tanya called sharply, "were you in our bedroom this morning?" I stopped mid-step. "No, why would I be?" She folded her arms, eyes narrow. "Because I found the photo box on the bed, the one from our wedding. You've been going through our things again, haven't you?" I blinked, confused, then realized she must have seen me in the hall earlier holding my own photo albums. She'd mistaken my nostalgia for intrusion. "I was looking at old pictures of my husband," I said evenly. "Not yours," Tanya scoffed. "You should ask before touching things that don't belong to you." I felt the sting, but I kept my tone calm. "Memories don't belong to anyone, dear, they just live where they are remembered." Her lips tightened. "Don't get poetic with me, Gloria, I'm serious, you're always snooping, watching us." Before I could reply, Evan came down the stairs, adjusting his tie. "What's going on?" "Your mother's been in our room," Tanya said quickly. Evan frowned at me. "Mom, why would you do that?" I stared at both of them, the man I raised and the woman who now spoke for him. My voice was calm but firm. "I haven't touched anything of yours, but maybe if you two spent less time assuming the worst, you'd remember who you're talking to." Tanya's mouth fell open slightly. Evan looked uncomfortable. "Let's not start drama, okay? We all live under the same roof. Let's just keep things peaceful." I smiled faintly. "Peaceful?" I echoed. "Yes, that would be nice." He sighed as if I'd failed some unspoken test, then muttered, "Just don't make things harder, Mom." When they left for the evening, the house was quiet again, that strange, hollow quiet that used to make me feel small. But not tonight. Tonight it felt different, like space I could fill with my own plans. I went upstairs, opened my drawer, and pulled out the stack of old photographs I'd been organizing. My wedding day, my children at the lake, my husband in his favorite chair, smiling with his newspaper. Each photo felt like a heartbeat I'd forgotten to count. As I slid them into fresh envelopes, labeling them by year, Tanya's words echoed in my head. "You're always snooping, watching us." I smiled to myself. "No," I whispered, "I'm just organizing my memories." By midnight, I'd finished sorting everything. My savings transfer had gone through. Joan had texted me that the new documents would be ready by next week. Outside, the rain had stopped and a thin sliver of moonlight stretched across the living room floor. For the first time in years, I didn't dread the next morning. I wasn't waiting to be noticed anymore. I was waiting to begin. The next morning, I drove without a destination in mind. The rain had eased, leaving the streets glistening under a pale gray sky. Every stoplight felt longer than the last, every mile heavier. Somewhere between the quiet hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the wipers, I realized where I was heading, or maybe where I'd been heading all along. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, the road had turned narrow and cracked. Weeds pushed through the asphalt, tall enough to brush against the car doors. I slowed down as the old house came into view, the one Evan refused to sell yet never visited. My real home. It looked smaller than I remembered. The paint, once a warm yellow, had faded into a tired beige. The porch steps sagged under years of neglect, and ivy had crept up one side of the chimney like a slow, stubborn memory. I turned off the engine and sat for a long moment, staring through the windshield. My breath fogged the glass. The world outside looked blurred, distant, like a dream I wasn't sure I wanted to wake from. When I finally stepped out, the air smelled of wet pine and old soil. The front door creaked open under my hand. It wasn't locked, it never was. No one cared enough to lock up what no one wanted anymore. Inside, the silence hit first. It wasn't empty. It was crowded with echoes, ghosts, laughter, and pain. The dust floated in the thin beams of sunlight that slipped through the broken blinds. Every step I took stirred up pieces of the past. In the living room, the wallpaper had peeled near the ceiling, exposing faint outlines of where picture frames once hung. I could almost see them, the photos that used to fill this room with life. Leela at 10, sitting cross-legged with her sketchbook. Evan at 13, grinning through braces. My husband holding the two of them in his arms, the three of them laughing so loudly that the neighbors joked we were too happy for our own good. And then the memory shifted. Leela's car, the rain that night, the phone call that cut through the sound of the dishwasher running. I could still hear the officer's voice, steady and professional. "There was an accident, ma'am. I'm so sorry." I had stood right here, clutching the receiver so tightly my fingers turned white. The clock on the wall had read 9:47 p.m. I hadn't set foot in this house since the funeral. Now 20 years later, the same clock hung frozen, the battery long dead, still marking 9:47. My chest tightened. "Leela," I whispered. My voice trembled, but the name felt warm on my tongue. "You were my heart. Evan was my duty." The words spilled out before I could stop them. I let them hang in the air like a confession, one I'd never dared to say aloud. "I tried to love him the way I loved you," I continued softly. "But he never let me. Maybe I failed him, or maybe I failed myself." For a moment, I swore I could hear her laugh the way she used to when she caught me talking to my plants, that light, careless laugh that made everything feel bearable. I wandered into what used to be her room. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the faint scent of lavender hit me, faint but there, stubborn like her spirit. Her posters still clung to the wall in faded patches. Her desk, dusty but untouched, faced the window overlooking the oak tree she used to climb. I ran my hand across the desk's surface and felt something under my fingertips, a raised edge. I bent down and found a photo album wedged behind a stack of old sketchbooks. It was wrapped in yellowed paper, tied with string. My heart stuttered as I pulled it free. The cover was cracked, the corners frayed. Inside were photos: Leela on her first day of school, Leela holding her first art exhibit flyer, Leela and me at the beach. And then tucked between two pages near the end, a folded envelope. My name was written on the front, Mom. My breath caught. The handwriting was hers, loopy, rounded, a little rushed. The kind of handwriting she used when she was excited. I sat down on the floor, my knees stiff, my hands trembling as I opened it. The paper inside was soft and yellowed, but the words were still clear. "Mom, if anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll keep living, not just surviving. You always tell everyone else how strong they are, but you forget that you are too. Please don't spend the rest of your life holding your breath. Breathe, laugh, live, even if it's just for me. I love you always. Leela." By the time I finished reading, my cheeks were wet. I hadn't realized I was crying until a tear splashed onto the page. I pressed my palm against it, afraid to smudge her handwriting. All those years, I thought I'd buried her memory to protect myself, but she'd never left. She'd been waiting right here between two pages, whispering the one thing I'd forgotten to do. Live. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my purse. The weight of it felt strangely comforting, like carrying a pulse. Standing in the middle of that dusty room, I looked around one last time. "You're still with me, baby," I whispered, "and I'm finally listening." The drive back was quiet. The sun had broken through the clouds, turning the wet pavement into a mirror. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need to. The silence felt alive now, no longer heavy but full of meaning. When I reached the city limits, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were still swollen, but there was something new behind them, something awake. I thought about what Joan had said at the cafe. You don't have to die to disappear. And she was right, but maybe disappearing wasn't enough anymore. Maybe it was time to begin again. That evening, as the sky faded into lavender, I took out my diary. The page from yesterday waited patiently, its ink barely dry. I turned to a new one and wrote in firm, steady letters. Day 3, Leela reminded me that living is the only revenge that matters. I underlined the last word twice. Then I set down the pen, folded Leela's letter beside it, and whispered into the quiet house. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm going to live, even if it means vanishing from those who never valued me." For the first time in decades, I meant every word. It took exactly 1 week to prepare. 7 days of pretending to be the same woman they thought I was: quiet, compliant, forgettable. 7 days of moving through that house like a shadow, smiling when spoken to, nodding when dismissed. I woke early each morning before anyone else to practice. I'd walk slowly across the kitchen, noting where the tile was slick, where the light fell just right, where the sound of shattering glass would echo loudest. Every detail mattered. Because this time my fall wouldn't be an accident. It would be a message. On the 7th night, the house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I moved carefully, deliberately, placing everything in position: the water glass on the counter, the walker near the edge of the rug, the lights dimmed low. My heart thudded steadily, not with fear but clarity. I poured the water slowly, letting it spill onto the floor, a silver puddle glinting in the half-light. Then I knocked the glass from the counter. It shattered perfectly, loud enough to wake anyone who cared. No one stirred. I placed my walker on its side beside the broken glass, the rubber tip just touching the water. The scene looked real, the chaos of an old woman's fall, an accident that demanded attention. Except this time there would be no body on the floor. I left the note on the table, short, clear, written in my neatest script. "Don't worry, I've found somewhere safe." Next to it, I placed my reading glasses and my rosary. The last two things they'd expect me to leave behind. Then I walked to the door, taking one final look around the living room, the space where love had died a quiet death. The walls still held the faint marks of family photos long taken down. The couch where I had once rocked my grandchildren now felt like a stranger's furniture. I whispered softly, "Goodbye," and then I left. The taxi was waiting down the block, engine idling. The driver was young, polite, and thankfully uninterested in conversation. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. "Tacoma," I said, "the Silver Maple Senior Center." He glanced in the mirror, surprised. "That's a bit of a drive. You got family there?" "Something like that," I replied. The city slipped away behind us, the streetlights fading, the skyline shrinking into shadow. For the first time in years, I didn't look back. I watched the rain hit the window, each drop blurring the reflection of my own face. I barely recognized her, this version of me with steady eyes and no tremor in her hands. I thought of Leela's letter folded in my purse, the ink pressed like a heartbeat against my palm. "If anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll keep living, Mom, not just surviving." I smiled faintly. "I'm keeping that promise now, sweetheart." By dawn we reached Tacoma. The rain had stopped, replaced by the pale pink glow of morning. The driver helped me with my suitcase, then nodded toward the small building at the end of the lane. The Silver Maple Senior Housing Center wasn't grand, but it was peaceful. A red brick complex surrounded by maple trees whose leaves glowed gold in the early light. A few residents sat on benches sipping coffee, wrapped in thick sweaters, exchanging the kind of quiet hellos that came from shared loneliness. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. The receptionist, a woman named Carla with kind eyes, looked up as I approached. "Good morning, checking in?" she asked. "Yes," I said, setting down my bag. "Under Linton, Gloria Linton." She smiled, typing the name into her computer. "Ah, here you are. We've got your apartment already. Room 214, facing the garden. You're lucky, it's the best view in the place." I smiled back almost shyly. I could use a good view. She handed me a key card and a welcome packet. "Breakfast is at 8, dinner at 6, and don't worry, we believe in privacy here. No one's going to bother you." That last sentence felt like a benediction. The room was small but bright. A single bed near the window, a wooden desk, and a shelf waiting for books I hadn't brought yet. When I set my suitcase on the floor, it hit me how little I own now: a few clothes, a photo album, Leela's letter, my diary, and the courage it took to leave. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The quiet here was different, not heavy, not cruel. It was the kind that made space for thoughts, not regrets. For years, I had lived inside that house like a ghost, unseen and unheard. Now I was alive in a place where no one knew my name, my past, or the people who had forgotten me. It was strange, liberation and grief arriving together. Hand in hand, I opened my diary again, the one that had followed me through every chapter of my quiet rebellion. I turned to a clean page and wrote, "Day 4, I died once in that house. This time I was born again." The words felt true, not poetic, not symbolic, just true. I looked out the window where the first light of morning touched the maple leaves, turning them gold. In the reflection, I saw a woman who looked nothing like the one Evan dismissed or Tanya mocked. This one had lines on her face, yes, but they weren't marks of weakness. They were proof of survival. Somewhere miles away, my son and his wife would be waking up to a kitchen floor scattered with glass and water. A walker tipped over and a note on the table. I imagined Evan's voice calling my name, not out of love but confusion. Tanya's sharp questions, the police at their door. Maybe for the first time they'd realize what silence really meant. Not surrender, not frailty, but freedom. As the sunlight warmed my face, I whispered, "Goodbye, Gloria Hale." Then I smiled, small, steady, certain. "Hello, Gloria Linton." Mornings at Silver Maple began slowly, the kind of slowness that felt like healing, not decay. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls from the dining hall and the faint hum of jazz playing on the communal radio. For the first time in years, I woke up without fear of being in someone's way. My window overlooked the garden where dew clung to the grass like tiny pearls. I'd sit by it every morning with my tea, breathing in the silence, not the cruel, heavy silence of that old house, but the kind that invited thought. It felt like the sound of peace. After breakfast, I wandered into the community room where a small group of residents were gathered around a piano. A thin man with trembling hands sat at the bench, his fingers hovering carefully over the keys. He looked up at me with soft, blue-gray eyes and smiled. "Don't mind the shaking," he said. "My hands dance now, even when I'm not trying to." I laughed quietly. "They look like they're keeping time to something beautiful." "Peter Lang," he said, offering a hand that trembled but held warmth. "Used to be a music teacher. Retired when the tremors started. Now I just play for the ghosts of old students who still remember a note or two." "Gloria Linton," I replied, using my maiden name without hesitation. It still felt strange on my tongue but lighter somehow. "Used to be a librarian. Still am in my heart, I suppose." He smiled, a touch of mischief behind it. "Then you'll understand why I say this. People are stories, Gloria, and you've got one hiding behind those eyes." Before I could answer, a woman's voice called from behind me. "Peter's right, you've got that look, the kind people get when they've survived more than they talk about." I turned to see Nora Bishop, one of the community social workers, mid-50s, sharp as a whip but kind in a way that didn't pity. Her hair was cropped short and her reading glasses hung from a beaded chain that jingled softly when she moved. "I'm Nora," she said, extending her hand. "I run the afternoon group sessions, stories, memory, support, nothing formal, just tea and talking. Talking, the one thing I'd forgotten how to do without apologizing for it." "I might stop by," I said. "Good," she replied with a knowing smile. "The world needs more listeners and more truth tellers." That afternoon I joined her session. The room was small and warm, filled with mismatched chairs and the faint scent of lavender. A circle of residents sat quietly, waiting for someone to begin. Nora broke the silence. "Anyone want to share today?" A man spoke about his daughter moving him here without warning. A woman confessed she hadn't spoken to her son in 6 years. When my turn came, my heart fluttered. For a moment, I almost passed. Then I thought of Leela's letter, still tucked safely in my diary, and of the promise I'd made to her to live. "My name's Gloria," I said softly. And I suppose I forgot who I was for a while. I let people decide how small I should be. I thought silence was safety, but silence, it's just another kind of prison if you're not careful. The room went still. Even Peter, who usually fidgeted, sat perfectly quiet. Nora leaned forward. "And what changed?" I smiled faintly. "I remembered that grief isn't an ending, it's just love that's learned to stand up again." Someone exhaled a long, heavy breath that sounded almost like relief. Nora reached over and squeezed my hand. That, she said softly, is going on the board. And she did. The next morning, those words, "Grief is just love that's learned to stand up again," were written in neat script on the corkboard near the dining hall. People stopped to read it. Some nodded, some smiled, some cried quietly. For the first time in years, my words mattered again. Weeks passed. I started helping out with small things, reading aloud in the library, organizing books, helping new residents find their way around. Joan called one afternoon to tell me the paperwork was complete. "It's official," she said. "Your new will is filed and sealed. Every cent of your estate will go into a scholarship fund for underprivileged girls who want to become teachers in honor of Leela." I closed my eyes, feeling the sting of tears. She would have liked that. She'd be proud of you, Gloria. You didn't just escape, you transformed. After the call, I sat in the garden with my journal. The air was crisp, the maple leaves beginning to turn red. I wrote slowly, letting each word settle like a prayer. Day 5, I gave away money, but I reclaimed my worth. Day 6, I taught someone how to write their first poem. Day 7, I laughed without feeling guilty. Because I did laugh, really laugh. Peter started teaching me old songs on the piano, one hand at a time. His tremors made the music imperfect, but the imperfections made it beautiful. Nora teased me into leading a small poetry workshop for the other residents. We met twice a week. We wrote about rain, about loss, about what it feels like when the world stops listening. But we always ended with something hopeful. One afternoon, Peter played softly while I read a poem aloud, one of my own. My voice wavered at first, then grew steadier, like I was reclaiming the rhythm of myself. "The heart doesn't break," I read. "It bends, learns, and blooms again, a stubborn garden after the frost." When I finished, the room was quiet for a beat, then came gentle applause. Not the kind meant to flatter, but the kind that says, "We see you." After everyone left, I sat alone at the piano, tracing the keys. The setting sun cast long shadows through the window, painting everything gold. For a brief, perfect moment, I felt Leela there, not as a ghost, but as warmth. And I whispered, smiling, "You see, sweetheart, I'm doing it. I'm really living." It was a Thursday morning when the news broke, the kind of morning that starts ordinary and then quietly rearranges your world. I was in the lounge at Silver Maple, sipping coffee and chatting with Peter about an upcoming music recital for the residents. The television hummed softly in the corner, tuned to the local station that usually played weather reports and city council updates. Then I heard a name I hadn't expected to hear again. Evan Hale. The CFO of West Point Financial is currently under investigation for potential embezzlement and misappropriation of client funds. My cup froze halfway to my lips. I turned toward the screen. There he was, my son, in a suit that suddenly looked too expensive, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously at reporters as he was escorted out of a glass office building. The reporter continued. Authorities have not confirmed the full amount, but early estimates suggest over $2 million in unaccounted transactions. Sources close to the investigation claim Hale's personal finances are deeply entangled with his clients' accounts. My hands trembled slightly. Peter noticed and reached over, turning down the volume. "You okay?" he asked gently. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "That's my son," I said quietly. The reporter's voice softened as the footage shifted. Tanya, now standing on the front porch of their suburban home, surrounded by flashing cameras. Her mascara streaked down her face, her voice trembling in perfect rhythm with the cameras. "We're devastated," Tanya said tearfully. "I had no idea. We're victims too. Our family has been betrayed." The word betrayed echoed through the room. I watched her clutch her designer scarf like a prop, her voice cracking in all the right places. Somewhere deep down, I recognized it for what it was: performance. But that didn't make it any easier to watch. The anchor returned to the screen, summarizing the allegations, while images of Evan's home, my old home, flashed in the background. The kitchen where I used to cook Sunday dinners. the window where I'd once watched Sophie ride her bike. And there, in one brief shot, the camera caught a glimpse of Sophie, standing behind Tanya, silent, pale, eyes fixed on the ground. My heart clenched. I excused myself from the lounge and walked quickly down the hall, the air suddenly heavy. I closed the door to my room and sat on the bed, staring at my trembling hands. I should have felt vindicated. After all the years of dismissal, cruelty, and theft, fate had turned its eyes toward them. Justice, some would say, karma, others might whisper, but all I felt was sorrow, because no matter how far I'd gone, he was still my son, and even if he'd forgotten the meaning of love, I hadn't. That afternoon, Nora knocked gently on my door. "I saw the news," she said softly. "Do you want to talk about it?" I shook my head. "Not yet." She placed a hand on my shoulder before leaving. "When you're ready, I'll listen." After she left, I sat at my desk, staring out at the maple trees. Their leaves were turning from gold to crimson, the quiet, beautiful death of autumn. And then that evening my laptop chimed. A new email. Subject: "Hi Grandma, it's me." My breath caught. "Sophie." I clicked it open, my pulse quickening. "Dad says you left because you hate us, but I know that's not true. He's angry all the time. Mom keeps crying for the cameras. I don't know what to believe anymore. I miss you. I just want to know if you're okay. Please write back. Love, Sophie." I stared at the screen, my eyes blurring with tears. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the message, small, patient, waiting. That one paragraph shattered something and mended it all at once. The guilt that had been building since the newscast now twisted into something sharper: responsibility. I had walked away from my son for survival, but Sophie, she was innocent. She deserved the truth, not the version they'd fed her through bitterness and lies. I wiped my eyes, breathing deeply. I could almost hear Layla's voice in the back of my mind. "Promise me you'll keep living, Mom, not just surviving." Living meant courage. Living meant truth. So I opened a new email and began to type, my fingers steady on the keyboard. "My dearest Sophie, you've always had your grandmother's heart, curious, gentle, and braver than you know. I didn't leave because I hated anyone. I left because I needed to remember who I was." Sometimes grown-ups forget themselves when they spend too long trying to please people who don't deserve it. What you're seeing on TV, that's not the whole story. But don't let it make you bitter. Your father's choices are his, not yours. You don't have to carry his mistakes. "I'm safe, sweetheart. I'm surrounded by good people. And I think you'd like it here. There's music in the mornings and poetry in the afternoons. If you ever feel lost, remember this: love is never wasted, even when it hurts." Before I hit send, I hesitated. Part of me feared this would open a door I'd fought to close. But another part, the part that still believed in hope, whispered that maybe this was the door I was meant to reopen. I pressed send. The moment the message left the screen, something shifted inside me, a mixture of relief and fear. For months, I had been rebuilding a quiet life, brick by brick, word by word. But now, the past had found me again, not through anger, but through love. And this time, I wasn't going to hide from it. I closed my laptop and sat back, staring out the window as the last of the daylight disappeared behind the maples. The air smelled like rain again. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the dark, "I'll tell her everything." Because truth, once spoken with love, was the only inheritance worth leaving behind. It was raining again the day I decided to see Sophie. The kind of steady, whispering rain that blurs the edges of everything, as if the world itself wanted to soften what was about to happen. After her email, we'd exchanged a few short messages, cautious, careful, coded. She told me she still took the bus home from school every Wednesday and always stopped by the small park cafe near her neighborhood. So that's where I went. The cafe was tucked between a laundromat and a florist, its window fogged from the warmth inside. I arrived early, sitting by the window, watching the rain bead and slide down the glass. My heart thudded in a way I hadn't felt in years, that anxious blend of hope and fear only family can bring. When she finally walked in, my breath caught. Sophie had grown taller, her hair darker. But her eyes were still the same soft brown I remembered from the nights she'd crawl into my lap asking for one more story. She froze when she saw me, then without a word she rushed over and wrapped her arms around me. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice breaking. I held her tightly, closing my eyes. "Oh, my darling girl," I murmured, "you found me." She pulled back, tears glistening on her cheeks. "I've missed you so much." We sat down, hands still clasped across the table. For a moment neither of us spoke, we just looked at each other, taking in the months we'd lost. Finally she said, "Dad told everyone you disappeared because you couldn't handle life anymore. He said you weren't thinking straight." I sighed. "That's the story he needs to believe. But I know better," she said firmly. "You left because they were cruel. I heard things, Grandma, the way Mom talked about you, the way Dad ignored you. I didn't say anything, I was scared." Her voice cracked on the last word. I reached across the table, brushing her hand. "You don't ever have to apologize for being young, sweetheart. Children aren't meant to fix what adults break." Tears rolled down her face. "I want to be like you when I grow up, kind but brave." That made me smile, a deep, trembling smile that reached my heart. I opened my purse and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, the kind I used to use for my library records, now filled with blank pages. I slid it across the table. "Here," I said softly, "when you don't know what's right until you find the truth." She ran her fingers over the cover, her eyes wide. "Like you do in your diary." "Exactly like that," I said. "Words will always tell you who you are, even when people try to convince you otherwise." We sat there for almost 2 hours, talking about everything and nothing, her favorite books, her art projects, the friends she trusted. For a little while, it felt like the world had given me back something it had stolen. Then the cafe door flew open. The bell above it jangled violently, and every head turned. Evan stood there, dripping from the rain, fury burning in his eyes. "Sophie," he shouted, his voice sliced through the chatter. "Get your things now." Sophie froze. "Dad, now." Then his gaze landed on me. "So this is where you've been hiding," he hissed, walking closer. "Teaching my daughter to lie, to pity you. What did you tell her, Mom?" I stayed seated. "I told her the truth." He slammed his hand on the table, making the cups rattle. "You're poisoning her against her family." I looked up at him, meeting his fury with calm. "I didn't poison her, Evan," I said quietly. "I raised her." The cafe went silent. Even the barista stopped mid-pour. Evan stared at me, his face tightening. For a second I saw not the angry man but the frightened boy he used to be, the one who thought love was control because that's what he learned from life. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The rage faltered, replaced by something uncertain. Sophie stood, trembling. "Dad, please stop. Everyone's looking." And they were. Phones were out, customers recording, whispering, the kind of scene that lived on the internet forever. He turned to her, his voice low, desperate. "Let's go home." She shook her head. "Not until you calm down." That simple act of defiance, quiet, steady, from a 12-year-old girl, shifted something in the room. I could feel it. Evan exhaled sharply, realizing he'd already lost control of the moment. He straightened, his expression turning cold. "You always knew how to humiliate people, Mom." I stood slowly. "No, Evan, I just stopped letting people humiliate me." He stormed out without another word, the bell above the door clanging behind him. For a moment the cafe remained silent, just the rain outside and the soft buzz of conversation resuming in low whispers. Sophie's hands were shaking as she looked up at me. "He's going to be so mad." I smiled gently. "Then let him be mad. Sometimes anger is just guilt trying to wear a different face." That night, Nora found me sitting in the lounge watching the replay on her phone. A bystander's video of the confrontation had already gone viral, millions of views in hours. "Elder neglect," the headline read. "Seattle woman confronts son in emotional cafe scene." Clips of my words played over and over again. "I didn't poison her, Evan. I raised her." Nora handed me the phone. "You're trending, Gloria." I let out a soft laugh, tired, astonished, almost sad. I never thought justice would look like a comment section. Sometimes, Nora said, smiling, it starts exactly like that. I stared at the screen, watching strangers write messages, some angry, some kind, some simply saying they understood. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible, not famous, not vindicated, just seen. I closed the phone and looked out the window where the rain had turned to mist. Somewhere out there, my son was unraveling. My granddaughter was growing, and I was finally living my own story, one truth at a time. The days after the cafe confrontation passed in a blur of flashing headlines and ringing phones. What had started as a private reunion between a grandmother and her granddaughter had become a national story. The woman who spoke up. News anchors debated it, talk shows quoted it, and strangers online turned my life into hashtags. But behind the noise, something real was shifting. The video had forced people to look closer, not just at me, but at him. By the following week, the State Financial Bureau had reopened Evan's case. Investigators now had a reason to examine where his client's money had gone, and perhaps where mine had gone too. Tanya, under public scrutiny and the weight of her own embarrassment, filed for divorce. Her lawyer cited emotional stress and reputational damage. And Sophie, my sweet Sophie, was caught in the middle of it all. Joan called me 2 days after the story broke. "I'm filing an emergency petition," she said. "Given the circumstances, you're the most stable guardian for Sophie right now. We'll get you a hearing." I sat at my small kitchen table at Silver Maple, hands trembling around a cup of tea. "Do you really think the court will listen to me?" "They will," she said firmly. "The world's already watching. It's time they hear from the woman everyone's quoting." The hearing was held in a quiet courtroom in downtown Tacoma. I wore a navy dress and the pearl brooch Leela had given me years ago. Sophie sat beside Joan, her small hand tucked in mine, her eyes filled with both fear and trust. Across the aisle, Evan sat alone. His suit looked a size too big now, his face drawn and tired. Tanya was absent, her lawyer had filed her statement remotely. When the judge entered, the room hushed. "Mrs. Linton," she began, glancing down at the paperwork. "You're petitioning for shared guardianship of your granddaughter, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." The opposing counsel, Evan's lawyer, rose. "Your Honor, my client wishes to maintain full custody. He acknowledges past misunderstandings but insists that this situation has been." The judge raised a hand. "I've seen the footage, counselor. We all have. Let's not insult each other with euphemisms." I almost smiled. Joan stood then, calm and steady as always. "Your Honor, my client isn't seeking to punish her son. She's seeking to protect her granddaughter not from physical harm but from emotional neglect. What this child needs isn't wealth or prestige. It's stability, compassion, and example." The judge nodded, eyes softening. "Well said, Mrs. Linton. Do you have anything you wish to add before I make my ruling?" My throat tightened, but I stood. The courtroom lights felt heavy, the air thick with expectation. I looked at Evan, not the angry man from the cafe, but the boy I'd once tucked into bed after thunderstorms. For a moment, all the pain, all the years of silence, all the distance pressed down on me. Then I spoke. "Your Honor," I began quietly, "children don't owe their parents gratitude, but they owe them humanity." A ripple of stillness moved through the room. "Love doesn't make you blind," I continued. "It teaches you how to see, to forgive without forgetting, to protect without possession." I failed my son by mistaking sacrifice for love, but I won't fail my granddaughter by staying silent. When I finished, the only sound was the faint tapping of the judge's pen against her notepad. After a long pause, she said softly, "Mrs. Linton, that may be the most honest statement I've heard in this courtroom in 20 years. She turned to the clerk. "Effective immediately, guardianship of Sophie Hale will be shared between her father, Evan Hale, and her grandmother, Mrs. Gloria Linton. The court finds Mrs. Linton to be a stabilizing presence and a moral example in the child's life." Sophie squeezed my hand so tightly that I nearly laughed through my tears. You did it, Grandma, she whispered. I smiled at her. No, sweetheart, we did. After the ruling, I found Evan standing alone outside the courthouse, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. He looked smaller somehow, not by height but by spirit. When he saw me, his jaw tensed, then relaxed. You got what you wanted, he said bitterly. I shook my head. No, Evan, I got what she needed. He looked away, eyes glistening. You made me look like a monster. You didn't need my help with that, I said gently. He winced, not from cruelty but truth. The kind that finally forces a person to look in the mirror. After a long silence, his voice broke. I don't even know how I got here, Mom. I was so angry all the time. The pressure, the money, Tanya's expectations, I just lost myself. And when I looked at you, I saw every mistake I'd made reflected back. It made me hate you. It made me hate myself. My heart clenched. Evan, he shook his head, tears spilling now. I was cruel, I know that, and I can't take it back, but I'm sorry, I really am. I took a slow breath, watching the man in front of me unravel piece by piece. For years I had imagined this moment, his apology, my anger, the chance to say everything I never could. But standing there, all I felt was an immense, quiet sadness. I forgive you, I said softly. He looked up, startled. After everything? Yes, I said, but not for you. I glanced toward the courthouse doors where Sophie stood watching us. For her. He followed my gaze, his face crumbling. I don't deserve it. No one ever really does, I said. That's what makes forgiveness work. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The rain had stopped, and sunlight was breaking through the clouds, faint but real. Finally, he said, Can I come see her this weekend? I smiled, though my eyes burned. That's what shared means, Evan. He nodded, wiping his face, and turned to leave. As I watched him walk away, I felt something lift, not joy, not triumph, but release. The kind that comes only when a wound finally stops defining you. I looked down at the courthouse steps beneath my feet, then up at the sky. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I whispered to myself, maybe forgiveness is just another word for freedom. And with that, I took Sophie's hand, and together we stepped into the light. The air by the coast always smelled like new beginnings, salt, seaweed, and that faint sweetness that comes when the tide retreats and the earth exhales. Months had passed since the court hearing. Enough time for the noise to fade, for headlines to vanish, and for life to quietly rearrange itself into something simpler, smaller, and infinitely more peaceful. Sophie and I found a little apartment by the water, 2 rooms, 1 balcony, and a kitchen that smelled like sunshine when we baked. It wasn't much, but it was ours. The walls were lined with second-hand books, and the windows caught the first light of morning like a promise. Some days I'd wake early to the sound of waves tapping against the rocks and find Sophie asleep at the dining table, her head resting on her sketchbook, colored pencils scattered around like fallen confetti. Other days she'd wake me instead, pulling at my sleeve. Come on, Grandma. Let's watch the sunrise before the world wakes up. So we would. We'd sit side by side on the balcony with our mugs of cocoa and coffee wrapped in blankets, our breath visible in the dawn chill. The ocean stretched endless before us, steady, patient, forgiving. I'd started teaching again, not in a school but in the small community center down the street. It began as a favor to Nora, who'd moved to Tacoma to expand her senior outreach program. Just 1 workshop. She'd said, help them write their stories, you'll love it. She was right. Every Thursday afternoon, I stood before a dozen seniors, pens in hand, hearts full of stories they'd carried for decades but never spoken aloud. Veterans, widows, caretakers, each with their own unshared chapters. We called it Memoirs of the Ordinary, but there was nothing ordinary about it. They wrote about first loves and last goodbyes, about childhoods spent during wars, about the ways grief teaches patience. And every time one of them read aloud, something softened in the room like a window opening after years of being sealed shut. Helping them tell their stories helped me finally finish my own. One evening after class, I came home to find Sophie sitting by the window, sketching me as I walked in. She looked up, smiling. Don't move, she said. You look peaceful. I laughed softly. I'm just old, sweetheart, that's not peace. It's creaky bones. She shook her head. No, it's different. You used to look smaller, like you were trying not to take up space. Her words stopped me cold. She was right. For so many years I had folded myself into silence, afraid to offend, afraid to need, afraid to exist too loudly. And now here I was taking up space freely without apology. Later that night, as we sat on the couch watching the soft glow of the TV, she turned to me, her voice thoughtful. "Grandma," she asked, "do you ever wish things had been different, with Dad, with everything?" I looked at her, my granddaughter, the mirror of everything I'd lost and everything I'd found again. The ocean wind drifted through the open window, carrying the faint sound of seagulls and laughter from the boardwalk below. I smiled faintly. If they were, we might not have found each other like this. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for a moment the whole world seemed to fit perfectly into that quiet little room. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, I sat by my desk and opened my journal, the one that had followed me through every fall, every heartbreak, every rediscovery. The pages were nearly full now, some smudged with tears, some marked with coffee stains, all of them alive with the pieces of who I'd become. I turned to a fresh page, the last in the book. For a while I simply stared at it, listening to the ocean outside, the gentle rhythm of waves against the rocks. Then I began to write. I used to think my story ended on that cold floor at 3 a.m. The night my body gave out and my heart almost followed. But sometimes falling isn't the end. It's the sound of your life demanding you stand back up. I put the pen down and ran my fingers over the words, tracing the ink like it was a scar that had finally healed. Outside, the horizon was beginning to blush, the first hint of dawn. I could see the faint outline of Sophie's silhouette against the curtains, her breathing soft and even. I closed the journal, placing it gently on the table beside Leela's letter. 2 stories, one ended too soon and one that had finally learned how to begin again. The sky turned from lavender to gold, the sun spilling over the ocean like forgiveness. And as the first light touched my face, I whispered softly, not to anyone in particular, maybe to myself. Maybe to the ghosts that had walked beside me all these years. I made it. The waves whispered against the rocks as the sun rose, soft, golden, forgiving. Sophie slept beside her sketchbook, and I sat by the window, tracing light across my journal's final page. I used to think my story ended on that cold floor at 3 a.m. But sometimes falling isn't the end, it's life demanding you stand back up. I smiled, closing the book. Outside, the tide kept moving, quiet, unstoppable, alive. Maybe healing isn't about forgetting who hurt you, but remembering who you still are. If you had to start over from nothing, what would you rebuild first, your life or your heart? Share your thoughts and don't forget to subscribe. Someone out there might need your story tonight.